Hello and welcome back to my channel. Industrial music is one of the most creative genres that would emerge out of the 1970s. And over the next 2 decades, it would go on to launch the careers of countless artists all over the world, infiltrate the mainstream, and its influence can still be felt today. I wanted to cover some of these artists' stories, so I figured, why not put together another 5 albums list? So stick around, because today we're going to discuss pressuring a record label with roadkill, playing a show with vacuum cleaners, and crafting club bangers from the sounds of televangelists. This is 5 records to get you into industrial. Industrial, like a lot of genres, is an umbrella term that spans about 3 decades of experimental, boundary-pushing music. The purest and original form of the music eventually gave way to the inclusion of traditional music conventions seeping in to allow the various offshoots and subgenres to become a bit more accessible and embraced by a wider audience. During its earliest phase, there were a bunch of artists, including German bands such as Cluster, Kraftwerk, and Yellow Magic Orchestra, incorporating industrial-type sounds into commercial pieces. However, one specific group is commonly pointed to for coining the term. Like a lot of genres, things got started with a catchy phrase that would stick with people. In this case, it was a record label, called appropriately enough Industrial Records. Started by UK band Throbbing Gristle, the label's motto was industrial music for industrial people. Known for their confrontational and shocking live performances, their albums Second Annual Report and 20 Jazz Funk Greats would be foundational in the establishment of the genre's ethos. Throbbing Gristle were influenced by musique concrete, a style that blended field recordings, musical instruments, and found sounds, often obscured and treated, as well as a heavy influence of tape loops and just looping of phrases in general. As well, they were heavily influenced by William S. Burroughs, in particular his prescription that audio recordings spliced with riot sounds might spark actual riots. Like TG, many early industrial artists would not only experiment with noise, but also aesthetically controversial topics, both musically and visually, such as fascism, sexual perversion, and the occult. Some of the early industrial vanguard would also include Cabaret Voltaire, SPK, Monte Cazaza, and Boyd Rice. Over time, the genre's influence spread into and blended with styles including ambient, synth pop, and post-punk, and would splinter off into several different subgenres including EBM and industrial rock and industrial metal. For today's video, I'm primarily focusing on some of the more popular groups that emerged in the 1980s, bringing industrial sounds to a wider audience. After all, the point of this video is to provide some easier entry points, and if I suggested a newcomer throw on Einstürzende Neubauten's Halber Mensch, however brilliant it might be, I don't know how far they'd get. Make sense? Also, I'm not going to cover 9 Inch Nails today. I know. I'm planning a guide for later this year when Trent inevitably drops a new record. Okay, let's get started. First record, Ministry, The Land of Rape and Honey. The Land of Rape and Honey is the 3rd studio album by American industrial metal band Ministry, released on the 11th of October, 1988 by Sire Records. The title was taken from a sign in a little Canadian town in Tisdale, Saskatchewan, because they sold honey and grew rapeseed in their fields. Al was heavily focused on toughening up his band's sound away from its record company-controlled synth-pop early years. He would drop the faux British accent used on Twitch and With Sympathy and incorporated heavier percussion and guitar elements. It would also be the debut of bassist Paul Barker's involvement with the project. The gruesome cover art depicts a burnt corpse of a Holocaust victim. And if you think that's disturbing, the record company originally didn't want to use it. That was until Al drove 1,200 miles to LA and barged into the Sire Records offices and threw a decapitated deer head from some roadkill he found on the table, proclaiming, "Here's your new fucking cover." All of a sudden, Sire approved the original image. Al was living on the edge back then, cutting himself on stage and high on heroin while touring with Skinny Puppy. William Burroughs' experiments with tape splicing became a big influence on the development of these songs. There's a clear thread running through all of Honey's tracks of samples being cut, looped, pitched, and repeated from all types of sources, ranging from NASA launches to famous movies such as The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Platoon, and Aliens, along with insistent, pounding, electronic drums and blasts of grinding metal guitars. Album opener Stigmata is this record's most well-known track and apparently Jorgensen's least favorite. It features these long, sustained screams during its runtime, delivered between verses that you can just imagine were the result of Jorgensen going through withdrawal waiting for his dealer. Quote, "Our whole lives revolved around these losers' schedules and when they could make it to the house or the studio. Sometimes I'd wait for hours and hours." Stigmata's hooky 3-chord riff was played with sampled guitars and a pitch shifter. My favorite version of this track is the rendition off In Case You Didn't Feel Like Showing Up, Ministry's 1990 live album from their incredible tour. It incorporates this guitar loop that's also present in the video version that isn't featured on this studio album, but I really think adds something. I have trouble separating Stigmata from Burning Inside off of Mine Is a Terrible Thing to Taste. I kind of feel like Al created this one as an updated, more realized version of Stigmata, as they're so similar. You Know What You Are is almost hypnotic in its repetitive, looped sample, synth, and rhythm collage. I forget who said it, might have been Al, but when I watched the excellent Wax Trax Industrial Accident documentary, the reason that so many of the industrial songs at this time sounded this way was a lack of programming skill. When using the rudimentary sequencers of the time, bands couldn't figure out how to advance to page 2 to get beyond the 1 or 2 bar grooves, so this highly robotic, simplistic pattern style would emerge. We'll be discussing more of this with the next record. Flashback features more William Burroughs cut-up sampling and lyricism. I'm sure Al intended this song to be tough, but there's something comical in there for me. There's this riff constructed from a pitched vocal sample that I swear sounds like it's Homer Simpson saying do, 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 and it's very distracting. It's obviously not, since it was 1988, but I can't unhear it. There, I ruined it for you too now. I'm sorry. This is a Rhino Records repress, inner sleeve with Al and Barker, first LP, second LP, next record, Front 242, Front by Front. Front by Front is the 4th studio album by Belgian band Front 242, released in 1988 by Wax Trax Records. Like the previous Ministry album, this one's also topped a lot of best of industrial lists over the years and was Wax Trax's biggest selling LP, certainly due to featuring 242's 2 most well-known songs. Really though, this was just part of a steady rise for the group, who coined the term electronic body music, or EBM, a subgenre combining sounds from industrial music and synth punk with elements of dance music, known for these prominent, sequenced, repetitive bass lines and militaristic vocal delivery. The band consisted of synth programmers Patrick Codenese and Daniel Bressanati, who would eventually just hang back as a studio-only member. Also in the lineup were vocalists Jean-Luc Demeyer, as well as second vocalist Richard 23, which was kind of like Jean-Luc's hype man, pioneering things for other aspiring hype men such as Maxim in The Prodigy and René Diff in Aqua. Front 242 would slowly become popular in their native Belgium, particularly for their infamous live performances that involved loud sound, aggressive stage presence, smoke, and bright flashing lights. After signing with American label Wax Trax in 1984, their profile would begin to grow worldwide, especially in America, where they would start to tour. Following their support of Depeche Mode on the European leg of the Music for the Masses tour in '87, the group would record and release their biggest record, Front by Front, the following year. Im Rhythmus bleiben, which is German for stay in the rhythm, is a fantastic aerobic workout track, where the band just encourage you to do just that for 4 minutes over some driving metallic beats and sequenced bass lines. Similarly, First In, First Out is sure to get you sweating, or at least chair dancing, with its grooving bass and declaration of "We like the body, move the body." Elsewhere, we get Welcome to Paradise, with its infamous TV televangelist samples. Although typically stoic and serious, this track shows 242 playing with irony and making an underground dance hit out of these USA daytime TV preacher samples, holding them up for scrutiny just as if to say, listen to this crap, isn't this ridiculous? Ask anyone who frequents an industrial club night, they will tell you about the moment when Headhunter comes on, guaranteed to resuscitate any floundering DJ's set. The cowbell and clav-heavy beat and that bass line, which almost sounds like a manipulated didgeridoo, are undeniable, not to mention the sing-along chorus. I had a chance to interview Jean-Luc back in 1997, and I asked him what this song was about, and he told me that the lyrics were inspired by his experiences working HR at a Belgian insurance company, and that he was trying to capture the sense of tribalism and competition that's inherent in trying to find and hire the best candidates. Not what I was expecting. After meeting photographer and video director Anton Corbin on the prior Mode tour, he would agree to direct Headhunter's music video. Unfortunately, he misheard them and thought they were referring to their new song as Egg Hunter in their Belgian accents, and so he developed this storyline where a man would carry around a giant egg around the future setting of the Berlaymont building and the Atomium in Brussels. Also, the band would be filmed with eggs in their mouths. Anton's gonna Anton. It's my original CD copy of Front by Front. The original booklet, signed by Jean-Luc Demeyer. Original vinyl pressing. Inner sleeve. I also need to share this. This is Never Stop. This was the band's final release for Wax Trax. The track Never Stop was recorded and released the year after Front by Front, but it just got lost in the shuffle. If you haven't heard this one, I highly recommend it. More DJs should be playing it, to be honest. Next record, My Life with the Thrill Kill Cult, Confessions of a Knife. Confessions of a Knife is the second studio album by industrial band My Life with the Thrill Kill Cult, or Thrill Kill Cult for short, released on the 12th of July, 1990 on Wax Trax Records. Before getting into the record, a bit of history. Back in the 80s, while Wax Trax was getting started, Frank Nardiello was the lead singer of a band called Special Effect, which featured pre-Ministry days Al Jorgensen on guitar. In time, Frank would meet another like-minded co-conspirator named Marston Daly, who had similar interests to him in music as well as in film. They would hash a plan to make a low-budget horror flick, which they would plan to call Hammerhead and the Thrill Kill Cult. The movie never got made, but they did record a bit of the soundtrack, which Wax Trax put out as a vinyl-only 12-inch under the band name of My Life with the Thrill Kill Cult. Eventually, Frank and Maston adopted the alter egos of Groovy Man and Buzz McCoy, together with an expansive lineup of members including backing vocalist collective The Bomb Gang Girls. They would go on to blaze a trail for industrial, sleazy, satanic lounge disco, inspiring later groups such as the Lords of Acid, White Zombie, and Marilyn Manson. After releasing a series of EPs and their debut, I See Good Spirits, I See Bad Spirits, the group would put out probably their best known and acclaimed album, amping up the kitschy B-movie samples, sleaze, and satanic panic to new levels. Groovy Man and company would mix a healthy dose of funky and organic instrumentation to create industrial music that's more extreme disco than house. A pulsing bass guitar propels many of the songs here, adding a rhythmic and textural depth to the group's sample and synth-laden sound, with themes of religion, sex, and pain. Opener A Daisy Chain for Satan, Acid and Flowers mix, announces itself immediately with an iconic sample proclaiming, "I live for drugs. It's great," before Groovy Man comes barreling in, screaming like he's having the worst time, tripping out of his mind. This is Thrill Kill Cult's best dance floor moment. A super doomy goth bass line and these twisting, bended synth pads and kaleidoscopic layering of the initial sample add to the mayhem. Second track, The Days of Swine and Roses, possesses a fine balance of nihilistic intensity and structural finesse. It's funky, but menacing in equal doses, and the use of sampling here is perfectly laid out with blasts of The Twilight Zone and numerous obscure films, including the opening score from the 1972 film Sisters. The lyrics, though, they take the spotlight. The Bomb Gang Girls continuously chant "Christian Zombie Vampire," to which Groovy shouts, "I am the father of nothing." The split remix EP that they would release with KMFDM is also fantastic. More on that later. Ride the Mind Way is another signature Thrill Kill Cult tune, always going over well in concert. It's got this awesome programmed funk bass line and terrific percussion. This one runs over 7 minutes and has tons of layered synths and samples, and save for the bass groove, sounds almost like early trance music. Another exploration of drug use, Groovy sings, "We leave our lives to ride the mind way," over which the Bomb Gang Girls intone, "Go Daddy Go," and "No Daddy No," over and over. While the sound of this record might come off a little silly or maybe tame by today's standards, it's only because so many later 90s bands would rip off this magic recipe of Satanism, sex, satire, and industrial dance. Personally, I consider 1993's 13 Above the Night to be their best album, but Confessions of a Knife is the best demonstration of their core sound and a perfect entry point to their fun and crazy musical world. Original vinyl release from 1990 comes with this Wax Trax Records catalog of all of their to-date releases. Inner sleeve, Who, Why, Murdered. Next record, KMFDM, Naive. When I was a teen, I used to love these guys. Naive is the fourth studio album by German industrial band KMFDM, released on the 15th of November, 1990 by Wax Trax Records. If you're looking for a starting point for essential KMFDM, this is it. Initially formed in Hamburg by Sasha Konietzko and Anne Esch, along with Raymond Watts, aka Pig, KMFDM's earliest output was as performance art. Sasha incorporated visuals such as burning beds and exploding televisions, as well as non-musical devices used as instruments. At this time, the band famously played one of their earliest shows using nothing more than vacuum cleaners. On their earlier albums, such as Don't Blow Your Top and UAIOE, the band would blend dub and disco with punk attitudes, industrial rhythms, and deep overdriven bass, coining the term ultra heavy beat. As the band's main producer, Sasha would experiment with Emu's Emax sampler, feeding in these short metal riffs. Quote, "What I always hated most about heavy metal was that the best riffs only came around once and were never repeated. So the fascination was to sample a great riff, loop it, and play it over and over again." In addition to their heavy reliance on sampling, there was all kinds of recycling going on, including song structures, lyrics, and titles. Eventually, the songs off of Naive would themselves be fed into the mulcher and rehashed on future KMFDM releases. Sasha had this vision for the project of conceptual continuity, which he had borrowed from Frank Zappa. Essentially, KMFDM is one big Ouroboros, just a snake that's always eating its own tail. On Naive, we'd see the entrance of guitar virtuoso Gunter Schultz, here credited as Svetlana Ambrosius, and with him, the beginning of their classic sound that would later peak with Angst and Nile. On Naive, the band's anything goes approach would throw even more styles into the KMFDM blender. A song like the title track Naive successfully accomplishes everything that made early KMFDM great. This is a badass, funky disco tune with a cool bass line and four-to-the-floor beat, complete with an awesome Gunter riff. A year on, KMFDM would release Naive on a split single with label mates Thrill Kill Cult's The Days of Swine and Roses, each band remixing each other's tracks. I highly recommend this version too. The song Godlike in its original form is KMFDM's signature tune, being one of the first songs that they created that featured a huge metal riff sample from Slayer's Angel of Death, looped endlessly over this monster beat. The Chicago Tracks version, featured on the CD and streaming versions of the album, is almost straight up metal, featuring many of the members that were part of Ministry during the Mind is a Terrible Thing to Taste tour, including William Tucker, Mark Durante on guitar, Paul Barker on bass, and Bill Rieflin on drums. While it's a fun listen if you enjoy metal, this one lacks any electronics, so I prefer the single version. The track Liebeslied's vocals are delivered in this deep snarl by N.Esh over a bombastic, pounding rhythm. Presented here in its original form, this track would feature an uncleared sample from Carl Orff's Carmina Burana piece, O Fortuna. When Orff's estate found out about this, Wax Trax TVT were ordered to pull the thousands of copies out of stores and immediately destroy them. Sasha would get around this by releasing an updated version of the record as Naive Hell to Go in '94 with the infringement remix version of Liebeslied, although sadly substituting an anemic keyboard riff in place of the iconic sample. But I'll link the OG version below. Original, deleted, destroyed CD version of Naive. I was very lucky to get this many years ago in a record store, used. Pictures of Sasha and N.Esh with hair. And this is my signed copy of the updated Naive Hell to Go, signed by N.Esh, Sasha, and Gunter. Why I didn't get them to sign the super rare copy is beyond me. I guess I didn't know at the time. I was a kid. And yes, I was a industrial band groupie, apparently. And the original deleted vinyl. Inner sleeve. And this is the split Naive Swine and Roses KMFDM remixing Thrill Kill Cult, Thrill Kill Cult remixing KMFDM 12-inch. Final record for today, Skinny Puppy, Too Dark Park. Where to start with this incredible album? Where to start with this super influential band? Too Dark Park is the sixth studio album by Canadian band Skinny Puppy, released on the 30th of October 1990 by Network Records, just in time for Halloween. Initially envisioned as an experimental side project by Kevin Key while he was playing keyboards in Canadian new wave band Images in Vogue, Skinny Puppy evolved into a full-time project with the addition of vocalist Nivik Ogre. Joined for a brief period by Bill Lieb before he would go on to start Frontline Assembly, they eventually settle as a three-piece lineup with the inclusion of Dwayne Goddell in 1986. Their sound was a blend of electronic patchwork sound collages, mixing high amounts of movie samples, particularly from horror flicks, with unsettling synth atmospheres and increasingly harsh rhythms. Ogre's lyrics were often politically charged, and he envisioned the initial idea of Skinny Puppy as life through a dog's eyes and seeing things humans would do, whether to animals or to the planet or to themselves, and not being able to really speak. After a run of increasingly experimental albums, the group would collaborate with Al Jorgensen from Ministry on 1989's Rabies. This album would be a bit of a departure from the classic Skinny Puppy sound, amping up the guitars and other rock aspects of industrial, as well as pushing the vocals to the forefront. Returning to their more signature style, Too Dark Park is the distillation of their earlier dark wave dance floor vibe, with a clear desire to move forward into denser territory. Although guitars do appear throughout, they are consciously understated, and Nivik Ogre's ragged baritone growl is deeply effective as this disenchanted narrator cataloging the wreckage of planet Earth due to ecological disaster. Grave Wisdom is the most accessible entry point to this album's dense collage-scapes, sounding sort of like hype music during an epic battle scene. There's far less in the way of odd noises or obscurities to its melodies and vocals. I love the drums, love the synth bass, and the way it just ends on a dime is just great. Wish they would have played this one live more instead of just that one show. Comment below if you know which one I'm talking about. Nature's Revenge, with its down-tempo and mellow intro, sounds almost new wave until Ogre's growl comes in with weather turning towards a storm. This song has a really beautiful resi synth bass line that leads to this amazing fretless bass solo at one point. There's even some lovely strummed acoustic guitar. This track offers a bit of respite in between the more intense songs. Speaking on his Patreon podcast, Kevin Key would share that Dwayne, Rave, and himself at this time would spend a lot of their free time in Vancouver's Stanley Park, just hanging out among the ancient trees. Listening to both the music and the lyrics of this album, it seems like the whole band was aligned on the environmental themes here, whether intentional or not. Morpheus Laughing starts with this spine-chilling arpeggio and string part. Eventually, this rattling percussion part comes in while Ogre shouts, "Deserted trees hallucinated, the bursted species." in a strange kind of way, the syncopated groove of the bass and the drums in this end section almost reminds me of Cameo's Word Up. While it's clad in full industrial elements, this outro is surprisingly funky. To me, Too Dark Park is a sampling tour de force and a truly uncompromising album. A real trip from start to finish. You know, initially I was conflicted on which Skinny Puppy album to talk about here. Like so many fans, I consider Too Dark Park to be their magnum opus. However, for the uninitiated, it's probably a bit daunting to digest, so might be best to dip into a track or two and work your way up to a full listen. But when you do, know you're in for a real treat. The dense soundscapes presented here reward repeat listens, and I still uncover new aspects 35 years on. This is the repress that came out in 2024. Save me from spending a fortune on the original. This is the original Tormentor 12-inch single. Blue. So that's gonna do it for today. Obviously, there are many more classic albums and artists I could have listed. I also know that this list contained a lot of obvious picks, but I wanted to share some of my favorites that are also easy entry points for newcomers. If you enjoyed this video, kindly give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to not miss out on any of my upcoming content, including artist-specific episodes planned on several industrial groups. Are you familiar with all the records I covered? What are your favorite industrial albums? Let me know down in the comments, as well as if you'd like to see a part 2 to this list, and I'll be sure to cover this classic. Thanks for watching. You can see more of my videos right here. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you guys in the next one.